Growing up in the Pentecostal church, a verse that I heard very often growing up was Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 3, which states, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your mother and father, which is the first commandment with promise, so that it may live long with you on the earth." But a lot of people ignore verse 4, which states, "Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath." People seem more excited about blind obedience than recognizing the dangers of abuse, neglect, and provoking your children. The main issue isn't giving instructions, but how the misunderstandings and misapplication of scripture can open the door to enable abuse. Through narcissism, spiritual abuse, toxic generational patterns, and the misunderstanding of Carrie White's gift, the mistreatment Margaret bestowed upon her only child spiritually destroyed her long before the events of Palma. Instead of having a loving home, her world was shaped by her mother's narcissism. Now, according to Merriam-Webster, narcissistic personality disorder, or narcissism, is a personality disorder characterized especially by an exaggerated sense of self-importance, a persistent need for admiration, lack of empathy for others, excessive pride in their achievements, and snobbish, disdainful, or patronizing attitudes. Well, there's a lot of people that overuse this term to oblivion. Carrie's mother fits the bill in a general spiritual and psychological standpoint. According to Dr. Marjorie J. Cooper of Baylor University, she specifically states that devout people who are narcissistic and exercise poor ethical judgment would be committing acts that are, according to their own internalized value system, blatantly hypocritical. Narcissism is sufficiently intrusive and powerful that it entices people into behaving in ways amicable to their most deeply held beliefs. So earlier in the film, there was one part that stood out to me. So Margaret White was heading to Mrs. Snell's house, and that's Sue Snell's mom. So Mrs. Snell did not want to let Margaret in because she knew how Margaret gets. She knows how she gets. So not only does Margaret push her way into Mrs. Snell's home, but Margaret literally dominates the entire conversation. So on impulse, Margaret imposes her own will and perception of life onto everybody around her, including Carrie. So as a result, Carrie has to literally uphold her mother's expectations, whether it's tone policing, whether it's holding certain things back in order to not upset her mother. So Dr. Anthony Lerman of Bradley University states that researchers generally agree that grandiose narcissism includes, I said that's so slow. So grandiose narcissism includes an inflated sense of self-entitlement, lack of interest in intimacy, and the use of interpersonal strategies that are self-enhancing. So throughout the film, Margaret never expresses general concern for Carrie at all. The only times she ever shows any type of interest or anything is when she believes that either Carrie had sex just because she had her period for the first time, or that she believes that Carrie is a witch, generally showing that the concerns that she has for her daughter are one of judgment and appearance rather than genuine care and maternal love. So not only did narcissism shape Carrie's reality, but spiritual abuse were the roots of both Carrie's outburst and Margaret's controlling behavior. So by definition, spiritual abuse is a form of psychological and emotional abuse where a person uses religious or spiritual beliefs to manipulate, control, shame, or exploit another person. So for example, like spiritual abuse in the church would be a pastor or deacon or somebody using their authority in the church to spew things that are not true in order to impose a specific kind of mindset on somebody. So according to Doctor of Ministry graduate, I'm gonna butcher this man's name so bad. I am so sorry if you're watching. So according to Doctor of Ministry graduate Gary R. Veenhuizer, he specifically states that the 5 characteristics of an abusive church system are authoritarianism, image consciousness, suppression of criticism, perfectionism, and obviously, of course, unbalanced dynamics. So all throughout the film, Carrie's voice was stifled. She was not allowed to have any type of autonomy or any type of vocalization of any kind. But the mother herself felt like she was chosen by God. So as a result, Carrie not only had a distorted perception of what Christianity actually was, but also the dynamic between Carrie and her mother was extremely unbalanced. So there's one part of the film that stood out to me as I watched it, because I took notes of everything, babes. I don't know where my notes were at, but I'm talking, I had 3+ pages, almost maybe back and forth 6 pages worth of notes. So it was one part in the beginning of the film where Margaret gets a call from the school explaining that Carrie got her period and so on. Carrie gets home and she starts abusing and beating her. And there's a phrase that she kept saying, and she was like a curse of the blood or something like that, or whatever the case may be. And something that she kept saying that kind of irritated me was that Eve is weak. Eve is weak. Eve was weak, right? And was visited with the curse of the blood. And when I sat and thought about it, I'm like, that's essentially just a perversion of the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross. Again, Margaret believed that she was God's chosen, but she has religious psychosis due to false prophecy. Margaret labels Genesis 3:16 as the curse of childbearing. However, childbearing wasn't the curse, as the curse was brought from disobedience of what Eve and Adam did from eating from the tree. So in the middle of the film, this part irritated me. Like, really, the whole movie irritated me, and it broke my heart. So there is another part of the film where Carrie specifically stops eating this apple cake that Margaret made because it caused acne. So then Margaret turns around and says, oh, pimples are just God's way of chastising you. So not only is this narcissistic behavior, but you are using religion to shame Carrie into compliance. While the prank that they pulled isn't inherently religious, the representation still proves to be one of spiritual abuse. So let me break this down. So in the Bible, pigs are deemed to be unclean due to their behaviors of swimming in filth and eating whatever they can, as well as being prone to health precautions such as trichinosis and, I know I said that wrong, trichinosis and tapeworms. And they were heavily associated with like pagan practices and surrounding cultures. So it makes it even worse is when Jesus healed the possessed man in Mark 5. The demonic spirits asked to be thrown to the pigs, and the pigs were like, we do not claim y'all, we do not want y'all, and they jumped in that water. So by dousing Carrie in pig's blood, not only are they implying that Carrie does not belong in their social circles, but they're symbolically branding her as filthy, which is something that Carrie's mother programmed into her from the moment she was born. Through her mother's abuse, the school's neglect, and the humiliation on prom night, Carrie's life and Carrie's sanity was sacrificed on the altar of other people's appearance. Within the web of abuse, the toxic generational cycles amongst Margaret and Carrie was another giant that was threatening to destroy both mother and child. So Carrie's bloodline consisted of like a lack of communication, toxic dynamics as a whole, violence, and altogether just immense dysfunction. So the head matriarch of the family is Sadie Cochran. Now, this is talked about a little bit in the 2013 film. It's not talked about in the 1974 film. I'm kind of blending all these things together, right? So Sadie gives birth to Judith, who marries John Brigham. I believe Judith and John were the owners of the Jolly Roadhouse, which was a bar in Moulton, Maine. So they give birth to Margaret. So throughout Margaret's youth, she was isolated and overzealous, right? And that continued to her adult years. So sadly, in 1959, John was pew-pewed. He was killed during a shootout. So as a result, she was very distraught, extremely distraught. So after John's death and Margaret's mother Judith gets married, Margaret starts going on a tangent, constantly saying, rebuking the new marriage and saying that they're shacking up and stuff like that. So, however, but as a result of Margaret's behavior, she was briefly kicked out by Judith and her new husband, right? So, however, just like with Mrs. Snell, Margaret refused to move out until like 1960. So in the book, Margaret's stepfather Harold states the one time that we went out to see her, she told us we were living in adultery even though we were already hitched and we were going to hell. She said God had put an invisible mark on our foreheads, but only she could see it. She acted crazy as a bat in a hen house, she did. Her mom tried to be nice, tried to figure out what the matter with her was. She got hysterical and started to rave about an angel with a sword who would walk through the parking lots of roadhouses and cut down the wicked. We left. So in the middle of the film, there is a brief discussion about Carrie's father figure, Ralph White. So as Margaret lost her dad, John, she leaned onto religion and met her husband Ralph in 1960. So in the novel, he was also a fundamentalist Christian. So fundamentalist is just a different denomination. So 2 years later, on March 23rd, 1962, they got married. So early on, having accidentally fell down the stairs, she suffered from a miscarriage. However, sadly, after drinking with friends, Ralph came back home and assaulted his wife Margaret, resulting in the pregnancy of Carrie on September 21st of 1963. So 7 months before Carrie was born, Ralph died in a grisly construction accident at work. So while pregnant, Margaret attempted to kill, like I said earlier, Margaret attempted to kill Carrie a total of 3 times. Not one, not two, but 3 times. But she believed Ralph stopped her from doing so even though he was dead. Within the Cochran bloodline, a particular trait amongst the women that I started noticing in the family was boldness, as Judith was a female business owner. Margaret was extremely outspoken about her beliefs, despite them being wrong, and being extremely over edge. And Carrie began building the strength to vocalize her boundaries and control her newfound powers. However, Carrie would have been the sole person to change the dynamics of the family and be the generational curse breaker had her environment been different. Instead, Margaret did 2 fatal things: isolating Carrie from her relatives and projecting her insecurities and unhealed wounds onto her only child, which created a monster who used a misunderstood gift to destroy rather than to create. So 1 Corinthians 12 speaks about the many different gifts that God uses or gives believers, such as speaking in tongues, interpreting tongues, wisdom and knowledge, prophecy, etc. Within these respective gifts, one has the capability of properly controlling and harnessing it for good, both to honor God and to assist others. In the film, Carrie White discovers that she has the gift of telekinesis. It was hinted that this gift didn't come about in high school, but actually when she was little. So in the book, it was rumored that her father might have had the same gift. However, it was confirmed that her great-grandmother Sadie, who was the matriarch of the whole family, had the same gift. Also, it hints at Carrie's power being spiritual, hereditary, and a symbolic reflection of the strengths, traumas, and flaws within her bloodline. So according to Merriam-Webster, telekinesis is the production of motion in objects as by a spiritualistic medium without contact or other physical means. So in other words, you control things with your mind. So the root aspect of telekinesis is correlated with focus and control, which is something that Carrie lacked within her day-to-day life, sadly. So Carrie's control was to protect and defend herself and her identity. Margaret's control was to manipulate objects and people through witchcraft and religious psychosis. As Carrie was exploring her gift, it became an outlet for her suppressed emotions, such as flipping her principal's ashtray, shattering light bulbs in the bathroom, or even causing a child to fall off of his bike. Now, through these moments, her gift became her lifeline, causing her to establish boundaries and to seek change within the trajectory of her life. as the hope was that her gift would help her make room for change. This act or change is like, to me, is a spiritual example of Proverbs chapter 18 verses 16, which states a person's gifts makes room for him and brings him before great people. So from a physical aspect, Carrie's other gift wasn't just telekinesis, but it was also sewing. So as Margaret often sewed, because in the movie she was sewing things for, I think, her church or something, even though in the movie we never see where the church is at, she's always sewing. If she's not yelling at Carrie about something or bothering other people, she's at that sewing machine. So when Carrie sews, it not only brings her joy, but it reminds her of the beauty of what she creates. So Ecclesiastes chapter 1 opens with, there is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every matter under heaven. So verse 7 continues to state, a time to tear apart and a time to sew together, a time to be silent and a time to speak. So from a spiritual lens, sewing is symbolic as it represents mending or fixing. So had Carrie properly harnessed her gift, she would have had the ability to hem things together, not just physically and mentally, but spiritually for her bloodline by breaking generational patterns. Carrie's gift can actually, to me, Carrie's gift can be viewed as a parallel to Danny Torrance's psychic abilities in Stephen King's The Shining. So this is going to be a spoiler. It's going to be a spoiler, by the way. So in the movie, right, in the novel, Danny uses his gift of The Shining to not only discern and fight off spirits in the Overlook Hotel, but he serves as an intercessor and protector of his mother Wendy and his mentor Dick Halloran. So his gift, The Shining, includes telepathy, telekinesis, discerning of spirits, and prophetic visions. So prior to this, he lived in an abusive home as his father Jack was a raging alcoholic. In the sequel, Dr. Sleep, Danny is on a similar footing as Carrie. He was shaped and bruised by the things that not only he had to endure by the hands of his father Jack, but at the same time, he had to deal with generational patterns, spiritual warfare, and dangerous coping mechanisms, such as anger and alcoholism, which is the same thing that his father Jack dealt with. However, despite this, Danny used The Shining to not only help people pass on, but he was using his gift to protect his niece and to become her intercessor the same way that Dick Halloran did for him. He used his gift to create and to help. Like, there is one part of the movie where Carrie tries opening up to her mom about being asked to prom. The very moment that happened, Margaret abuses her once more. So after that, Carrie's gift is revealed, and Margaret later calls her a witch. The phenomenon is very similar to how God will give specific people gifts and their families will demonize them about said gifts. It's kind of similar to the movie Encanto, where Bruno has the gift of prophecy to see what's to come, and everybody's like, you don't know what you're talking about, shut up, you don't know what you're doing, only for everything that Bruno was saying to come to pass. It's very similar to how Jeremiah told the people of Judah and told the king of Judah to repent, or they were going to be handed over to their enemies, and they didn't listen. So when it happened, everybody got mad. And the book of Lamentations actively talks about that. So Carrie's gift is also similar to Samson in the Bible. We all know Samson, we all know the whole thing with Samson, but if you haven't, Samson had the gift of super strength, but he lost it as he was deceived and betrayed by the woman he loved, and Carrie was kind of in that same situation. There is one part of the movie, so as Carrie was leaving the house and was celebrating her newfound freedom, like, yeah, I'm going to prom, her mom proceeds to spew Exodus 22:18 at her, and that specifically states that you shall not allow a sorceress to live, in which the proper context was in the Mosaic law amongst the Israelites. So through this verse, Carrie was falsely labeled as a witch, as her mother was going out of her way to mislabel and misunderstand her own child. So after the events of prom, Carrie not only uses her gift to defend herself, but also that, once again, all the suppressed emotions that she had from all of this stuff happening, she just blew up. And it's understandable why, pertaining to the events of the film. So the moment she gets home, her mom tries to kill her yet again. And the heartbreaking part for me was that despite her own mom trying to kill her, Carrie still went out of her way to protect her mother's body as they were dying and the house was sinking. I think the thing that's heartbreaking most is that Carrie wasn't given a chance at life, and she wasn't given the chance for her gift to grow and flourish because it was tarnished the moment Margaret started projecting her unresolved trauma and issues on to Carrie. And as a result, that prevented Carrie from growing and discovering her own identity and her own personality and her own autonomy as well. So, as someone that grew up in the church and I experienced spiritual abuse and manipulation, and I came back to Jesus as an adult, there were a lot of reflections in my own life that I saw in Carrie's. So much that the movie started to become a bit triggering for me. Like when I was younger, I was like one of the ones that was cheering for Carrie, like, yeah. But then I got older and it absolutely shattered me. Like, I'm talking, I was crying. Like 2 decades later, for me, it was an eye opener for how mentally, emotionally, and spiritually taxing both legalism and abuse are. So, from birth, Carrie was a gifted and shock critical thinker whose mom literally stifled her voice through manipulation, the judgment of others, and her grandiose delusions. She was a reader, a seamstress, and would have grown into a beautiful young woman. Like throughout Carrie's life, she endured hardships that God would have never approved of. Like left alone and unsupported, she questioned everything she ever knew, nor was given the answers, even at the end of her life. And this is the part, this is the kicker that really messed me up. Like at the end of the film, Carrie died saving the person who tore her down the most. Carrie's actions and death left a lasting impact in Chamberlain, Maine, but that's not the meat and potatoes. Within her story lies a deeper truth of how dangerous abuse and manipulation is when left unchecked. So Carrie's story reminds me of Luke chapter 21, verses 16 through 18, which states, "You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends. They will even put some of you to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but not a hair on your head will perish." So Carrie's story reminds me that despite our past and pains, we're nurtured with love and guidance. Every gift has the ability to heal, protect, expose, and transform not only the gifted, but those around them.